Hey everybody, I am so excited about all of the sharing that's been happening through these 11 conversations. And you are a part of and participating in the From Hatred to Harmony Live Summit hosted by Stained Glass Spirit. And in this next 30 minutes, I get the pleasure to have a conversation with Reverend Linda Martella Whitsett. And this is a real delight for me because I've always wanted to spend a little bit more time with her, and then to hear her insights and her motivations and her passion on this specific topic is just going to be a super treat. If you've not met me before, my name is Tracy Brown, and I am the founder of Stained Glass Spirit and the author of the book, Stained Glass Spirit, Becoming a Spiritual Community Where Oneness Does Not Require Sameness. So, Reverend Linda, thank you first for saying yes. And then let's just dive right into what made you say yes. Like, why do you think it's important for us to rely on our spiritual teachings in New Thought to address, interrupt, or end racism?
I'll begin by saying thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I jumped on the opportunity because this is very personal and important to me personally. I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. I just posted my protest playlist because I've been having flashbacks to those days, from the days when I was marching against the Vietnam War and for civil rights. I've been married 41 years now to my husband, Giles, who's an American of African descent. And we have 2 adult children. This touches me very personally and deeply. And one of the things that's happened with me personally since George Floyd's murder was flashbacks to my own family circumstances 41 years ago when my father disowned me. It's been healed, but the feelings and the upset from family members who, in my opinion, were complicit with that, and all of the range of just things that have just popped back up for healing inside of me, my own personal stance of that. Meanwhile, I'm observing my husband going through full-blown PTSD from his own experiences in a life growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And then I think about the stories my children have told me through the years of their own encounters that I'll admittedly say that I was uneducated about the importance of dismantling the racist structures in our country. I was ignorant of that. Again, in the 60s and 70s, we were looking for a melting pot world, and Giles and I both felt like we're all the same, we're all people. And I have had quite an education through the years of realizing that I cannot enter my own children's experience in the world around me. I have mine, but I don't have access to theirs, only as a witness. And it's a painful witness. It's a painful witness. Mm-hmm. So, I felt so present moment mindedness. My son is turning 40 this week, and I'm thinking to myself, could be my son, could be my son, could be one of my nephews, could be my brand new baby grandboy who just is only 5 months old. Could be him if we don't do something, if we don't change this in this world. I have been in agony personally from my own witness. And it's not lost on me how the potential of our spiritual practices, our teachings in New Thought You know, we subscribe to one power and the whole field of oneness, which doesn't mean sameness, does it? But it means unified, that we're unified in a value and in a purpose that is greater than any single one of us. And that purpose, in my mind, includes the dignity and value and rights and privileges of every human being. To exist, to be loved, to have the fullness of life, all that we know. So for me, the principle that I really land on is something that is really, really part and parcel of New Thought, which is the principle of healing. The principle of healing, which is, you know, when you think about it, healing means to renew, to refresh, to restore, to realize. And whenever we're in a healing need, and this is all prayer, and I'm a prayer person, I lead the prayer ministry for unity, right? So for me, all prayer is for one purpose. It's for healing. It's for healing of my thoughts. It's for healing of the misunderstanding of truth. It's for healing of sort of the false ideologies and the false thought processes that I have built, mostly unconsciously, and yet they were given to me and they got internalized, and unless I challenge them, unless I bring them to truth, you know, unless I look for that, come up to the mountaintop in consciousness, unless I do that with them, I can live a whole lifetime without questioning what I believe. So for me, that's the point. Healing is the principle. It's that restoration of the truth, of the thought of truth. And for me, that the way we do that in New Thought is we interrupt. You use the word interrupt in your line of questioning for me as I was preparing. We interrupt the false thought processes. We interrupt the mistaken ideas. We interrupt them by questioning them. And what causes us to do that is pain. It's feeling. It's the feeling. It's what we call contrast, right? It's the contrast between the ideal. Look, in the ideal, everyone is valuable. Everyone has the same essential nature, which is divine. Every single one. All forms of life were essentially divine. So when I experience in my life a circumstance that seems counter to that, that's not of that caliber, that seems to have me feel less than, or someone else being treated as less than, I feel pain. And I feel pain because what's natural to me is the unifying power of love. That oneness principle is what's natural to us. It's what's the truth of us. And when that's not what I'm getting in my experience, I feel the disconnect. I feel a sense of separation and all that goes with that, and all the actions that have led to the violence and that's just one expression of it, is violence, and the microaggressions that have been far more insidious and far more destructive, really, over time. Those all happen because because we that have not felt the rub. We've not turned inward. We've not attuned to that essential nature of us that knows the truth of our oneness, of our wholeness of being, right? Of the nature of us all.
Wow. So like there's enough to unpack there that we could be like, we could use that and then we could go for 4 hours or 6 hours beginning to unpack that.
Mm-hmm.
First, you know, I do want to acknowledge you sharing the personal nature of this conversation, because sometimes it it takes being personally impacted, right? In this case, being in an interracial marriage, having biracial children, seeing, seeing it play out in the lives of yourself personally or someone you really care about.
Mm-hmm.
And no one could know that just by looking at you, right? If I
Right.
didn't already know
Right.
that information, I would not
Sure.
necessarily assume it. Um, and then to go on with the fact that the racism that exists is not in alignment with what you know to be the spiritual truth is great. But I wanna sit for a minute in this idea that the principle you landed on was healing. And then when you talk about prayer a as a process, as a practice that can be used to heal thoughts, heal ideas, heal false beliefs, heal false ideologies. It is true. We Prayer interrupts the thought or the pattern
Yes.
and claims and affirms a new pattern,
Yes.
a new thought.
Yes.
And we sometimes forget that when we are committed to our prayer work, it is not the only thing we have to do, but we need to be consciously aware of what we are doing when we pray.
Yes. 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 The thoughts and prayers thing. We go back to thoughts and prayers. And you've probably seen the posts yourself when we post a prayer message and people take issue with it and get upset and say, well, what's prayer hasn't done anything. Prayer doesn't fix this. We need action, right? Well, so the whole of New Thought is built on thoughts and prayers. All of New Thought is about the dynamic uh, transformation of thought. And prayer is one of the practices that we do in order to accomplish that. So thoughts and prayers have to come first, right? From the invisible to the visible, from the formless to the form, from the heavenly to the earthly reality is how it happens. And so we go into that. Could be conceptual, if we're in mind, if we're thinking in terms of mentally, but also the ideal, the spiritual ideal. But then we have to take that into the actual, into the actionable, right? The actionable reality around us. We have to then do something with that ideal that we realize. Otherwise, it's not complete. Realization, to me, realization is not real. Realization means to make it real. And it's not real until we do it.
Right.
It's
There's
a
got to be
realized
some
thought, but that,
physical, right, some physical manifestation in behavior, in matter, in physical matter, or in behavior, action, something you do or something you say. Otherwise, it hasn't demonstrated. Just because I believe it and I know it is true in the invisible, right? Until
yeah,
it demonstrates. So if there is someone who is um, let's use a real example. So with COVID-19 and the pandemic and the first few weeks, there was a lot of energy, a lot of anxiety, a lot of unknowns. And then by the middle of the second month, when the statistics, the mortality statistics were beginning to be reported, and it was very clear that there has been a disproportionate number of African Americans, specifically with under the umbrella of people of color, who are disproportionately dying, who because of health conditions are, disproportionately contracting the disease, and because of access and care, dying at a higher percentage. And to hear, and then to see someone who is very steeped in new thought and saying or typing, well, my thoughts and prayers are with you. That is great. And I know that you mean well. And I want your positive thoughts and I want your prayers. But I also want to see what you're doing to make sure that this stops or this doesn't replicate itself. I want to know what you're doing, whether it's with healthcare or whether it's in some other aspect. What are you doing that helps to eliminate these kinds of outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
Whether they are social or clinical or in health or finance or housing or real estate, because that just shines a spotlight on this one aspect, but you can look at any sector and see the same pattern.
Yes. Yeah. And I really get it that the the first feeling that comes in the heat of all that we've been in the midst of, right? The COVID-19 followed by just this really dark time uh, for unwarranted violence against Black people, particularly. Um, it's just so easy to feel so overwhelmed that, and to feel as though, you know, my little bit wouldn't do much, right? It's so easy to feel like, where do I begin? And I'm included in that. I mean, it's just a bundle of feelings. I have just been in a state of weeping and, you know, having to make that protest playlist just so that I feel like I can get my rant on, you know, that I can be as upset as I need to be and work it out in the gym that way, right? You know, playing Aretha Respect while I'm, you know, while I'm working out on the elliptical machine and such, right? You know, and that's just to deal with my own feelings. That's just to deal with, you know, the right here and now of it. But I have been searching for where's my place in the movement that's essential for right now. And one of the things I am committed to, and I'll say it right here as publicly as this is, right, that I am going to work for people's voices to be heard in the upcoming election. That's where I'm going to put a lot of my attention. I'm going to make sure to get people to the polls. I mean, I'm even going to look at carving out that day to be a driver for people who need rides or whatever. So I've got to contact, you know, the local voting commissions and that sort of thing so that I really get plugged in, because I need to do something absolutely constructive. And that's a first step. It's one thing that I can do that's immediate and that for me, I can plug into and feel like I can make a tangible difference by doing that.
Right, and we all have different places where we can plug in. That's the beauty of truly having a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-generational society. We all have different places to plug in. How do we talk to people in our spiritual communities? Because, right, many of them would say, well, you're going to go work on the polls, but you know, that's political and I don't want to do that. I would say, you know, you don't have to do that. That's what Linda's is to do. You know, what is it that you are going to do? That's the point, right? The point is, if you change the thought and you change what you want to see, then what actions are you going to take that help to midwife that new vision of a world where, a country where, a city where, a spiritual community where racism does not go unnoticed and is not allowed to thrive. And from again, I guess because that's the focus for today, keep going back to what is it in the spiritual teachings, what is it in our teachings that compel us to act?
Yeah, to me, it's the principle of one power. I go back to that, and really that power plays itself out in divine love, in life, in wisdom, in all of our capacities, right? Our spiritual capacities. And what is divine love? It's the unifying power. It's the harmonizing power. Your theme here, hatred to harmony. It's the harmonizing power that starts in mind and then plays out in action and in relationship and in service in the ways that we act. At Unity World headquarters, we've been committed for these last handful of years now to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we devote a lot of budget dollars to, having trainings and having sessions where we can really we can really explore what we learned, what we've inherited, what we've taken in, and begin to to become more conscious and aware. Now listen, we're in the Midwest, and there's a lot of entrenched mindsets and a lot of belief systems. Look where we are at Unity Village and the surrounding town, Lee's Summit. These were sundown towns. So there's a long historic sort of mentality that
Some people don't know what a sundown town
oh
is.
yeah when you had to get out of town when the sun went down if you were black, that was a law, and you get run out of town, shot and killed if you
Well, I
didn't.
was gonna say, if you were in town, you wouldn't get run out of town. You would
No,
never be
you
in town.
wouldn't survive it. Yeah, you'd get lynched.
Yeah.
So, this is that's not to say that that's the prevalent mentality today, but it's there. It's there in the undercurrent. It's there in a so many communities in the vicinity that have really zero or very little diversity, and therefore less less exposure. I mean, this is what happened with my dad, exposure to other human beings who were raised differently, even just different religions. That was a big deal even for my father in his age. And so, to see the communities where he lived begin to become more integrated. And so he's meeting people at the YMCA where he was swimming for exercise. And, you start to have different experiences. So, but in the Midwest, it's been challenging, and there's a lot of good hearts even at Unity headquarters, and yet it's a re-education process. It's a squirming through the discomfort of recognizing some of the inherited mindset that's the unconscious bias that you've lived in. So there's been a lot of uncomfortable conversations and things, but it's been bearing fruit. And that's one thing I'm committed to as one of the executive team at headquarters. We're committed to hiring practices and to to creating an environment where we can truly have inclusivity and a feeling of respect for all, for all who, here's the thing that, if you have no diversity and then you say, well, we'll hire a few people who are black. Well, that's not inclusivity, because, if you don't change the culture and the systems, there's no sense of being at home, and they're not going to stay. They don't feel like they belong here. So it's the systems, even within our culture at headquarters, that we are becoming conscious of and that we are working to undo and rebuild.
Right. And even, you know, when you think about headquarters and you're thinking about the entire organization, you know, that same pattern. So as you said, that's like taking the bigger society and bringing it to this organization.
Yes.
But then the same thing happens on the individual church level, because it's, you know, the same thing. If you want to have, if you say you're committed to inclusion, especially around race, and you want to have people from different racial and ethnic groups as as members of your community,
Mm-hmm.
that's great. And the
Mm-hmm.
entire culture has to change. The people coming in don't just change to make you comfortable or assimilate to your way. You have to look at your music. You have to look at your
That's right.
messages. You have to evaluate what kind of social activities do we plan and what days of the week and what times of the day are they. You have to look at all of that to, as you said, then break down what's there, deconstruct what we have, even though we kind of like what we've had.
Yes, yes.
We have a
That's good.
different goal now. And so we
Yes.
have to reconstruct with that goal in mind.
Yes, and the big challenge to that is it's understandable. I mean, it's true about anything you change in church. I mean, just try it. Just change one thing and oh my gosh, the furor, right? You can't change that. It's not church without that, right? So I remember bringing drums in and I almost had a mass exodus. You know, this was 15 years ago. But that's really the key. I mean, if you don't see representation in the leadership, in the staffing, in the children's program, in right, if you don't see that and you don't feel um, like you can be who you are fully in that community, that's the
Right.
challenge.
Right.
And
So
really, the blind spot on the part of everyone who's always been there is like, well, we're welcoming, we're a friendly place, everybody should feel at home here, but don't make us change a thing in order for that to happen. It's a big challenge because you need the buy-in, and that comes from understanding, and that is the healing. That's the healing that
that
wants to happen in a community, is the healing of that thought that, you know, well, other people just have to adjust to us. That healing of the thought that, well, we're just a welcoming community, without examining what have our practices been, and how at home will someone walking in who doesn't know us and who you know, who doesn't share our heritage, you know, how is that
exactly.
going to work?
And it's funny, you went exactly where my mind went as you were talking. It's like, oh, we're full circle right back at what is it that needs to be healed.
Yeah.
And then that will define the work that we do. And the one thing that I want to add before we wind down is that this idea that we're going to deconstruct to construct something new doesn't have to mean that we're irretrievably broken or bad, right? And I think sometimes we we find that people are so defensive when we're having this conversation because they hear it as it, like your example, but we're welcoming and we want all kinds of people. But then when you say, great, so let's get feedback about how our visitors, do they really feel welcome or not?
Yeah.
And let's get input from the people we're trying to attract to our community to learn what kinds of programs or classes and events they want. And if the group that's been there for a long time, or the group that's very comfortable, if they hear that as you've been doing it wrong, right, then it's really challenging. Instead of hearing the way you've done it has been great for the result that we got, but now we have a new a new desire, a new growth. Plus, we're serious about making sure we break through any structural and systemic patterns that support or encourage even these results. So that, I think, sometimes in our spiritual communities, on top of the discomfort you already mentioned, no one, people don't like to be uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, it's not, there is a thing as such as fragility or white fragility. That's true, that exists. But
Mhm.
sometimes it's simply resistance to change. And I hear you as telling me I've been doing it wrong all along.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And then I keep looking at backwards instead of giving me a vision that I can jump into, and let's move toward that vision together.
Yeah. It really is the key. It's the key. Understanding is the key. I'm far more willing to change something about my patterns or my habits, whatever, when I understand the value of it, when I understand that it has a value and that there's a higher purpose for that than staying the way I was. And I think that's true of communities. And that so that whole field of change management really applies here, doesn't it? People who specialize in that have been my teachers, because I sure needed it when I first went into a church and kind of had lots of ideas and did some change kind of harshly. Right, I would do it very different today. I've learned a lot about change and how to support people in coming on board, because really I believe people are, especially people in church, they're good-hearted, they care. So to appeal to that part of them and help and support them in like you said, in seeing a greater vision, right, I think could be very valuable. But that is the big challenge for white folks, is feeling guilty, feeling ashamed, feeling like we're being made. I listened to a beautiful Brene Brown podcast last week, where she was delineating the difference between feeling ashamed and being shamed. Right? And none of this conversation is about somebody trying to shame you, but feeling shame just is where you what worry, is there something wrong with me? And nobody's asking you to feel that, but may that feeling, if it should arise in the midst of these difficult conversations, should that arise, may we again heal that, maybe heal that, and come to see that's coming from a place of insecurity and whatever else, all the underlying reasons for that, and come to see your true nature instead. That nature that really does align with, um, with safety for all Black people in this country as one, just as one value, right?
Oh, the hardest thing, I've been saying this all day long, the hardest thing about these conversations is that 30 minutes is just not long enough. So I want to remind everybody that I've been having this fabulous conversation with Reverend Linda Martella Whitsett, and we have been talking about this movement from hatred to harmony, and why there is a spiritual seed that is seeking to be nurtured and grow through our actions. And this has been part of an all-day summit. I will mention that next week there's going to be a similar summit where we will go beyond the focus today that has been specifically on racism. And we'll begin to look at the spiritual mandate for inclusion overall and dive into some conversations with people about how that shows up in how it could show up in our spiritual communities related to other dimensions of diversity: sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, immigration status, as well as a little bit of a focus on racism as well. Gender equity, I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit as well. So, but this is all the time that we have for this conversation. And Linda, I just wonder if there's anything that just it didn't come up naturally, but you want to make sure that we don't close out without saying it, or a closing comment.
Well, I'll say this: I think if I focus on the nature of God in the when I try to conceptualize that the indescribable, right? God. Uh, it comes down to, like it does for so many people, it comes down to love. And love in a spiritual discipline is power. It's not just a happy feeling, right? It's not just a feeling of acceptance. It's a truly transformational power. It's the power of magnetism. Charles Fillmore called love the great magnet of the. So it's magnetism, it's harmony, and it's unity. And those three forces are forces that we wield. When you talk about the law of attraction, we're talking about the law of love. That's the law of love. All things wanting to work together for the good of all. That's divine love. And so if you want to heal anything, I mean, that's as likely a pathway as any is to lean into divine love, not as some happy little feeling, but as the real force that could move the world.
And with that, we are going to raise our hand and commit to move the world forward. We are going to move away from racism and move into that love and that harmony and that unity. Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you. I'm so grateful.